study was mentioned and provided for the record, so I'll just tell everyone what's actually in that study. It has severe selection bias. It's based on a survey in 2015. In order to be eligible to participate in that survey, respondents had to identify currently as transgender or gender diverse. So that means that anyone who used to identify that way was automatically excluded. That means people who regret that transition are detransitioners, by definition excluded from the study. And look, most of these studies, by the way, are on adults, not children. There's almost no evidence for any of the benefits here on actual children. Most of these studies that are being cited are for adults. None of them are randomized control trials. They don't account for placebo. There's no ability to separate results from other elements of the care routine, such as psychotherapy. And correct a couple other just complete lies that were said earlier. This bill does not prevent psychotherapy or the compassionate kind of therapies that are indeed needed for people who have gender dysphoria. We do not deny the existence of gender dysphoria, but we should be following the science here and the science that our peer countries are following, which says that you should not immediately affirm gender and start them on irreversible hormone therapies or puberty blockers. And you say, well, that's not happening. But look, we have quotes from the head of Boston Children's saying they're handing out puberty blockers like candy. That's just a direct quote. So we're not fighting some imaginary ghost here. We're fighting something that's really happening. You can't deny it's really happening. And any other studies that you want to bring up, I'll be happy to rebut. And I yield back to my friend, Mr. Hudson.
I yield back my time.
Hey, wait, the gentleman yield, Mr. Hudson?
I'll be happy to yield, gentleman from Texas.
Isn't it kind of ironic? We worked in this committee to protect our children from TikTok, but not this. I yield back.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Trahan for 5 minutes.
I have amendments.
Is there any other discussion on the underlying bill? Chair recognizes Ms. Fletcher for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be brief. One of the things I've learned in my time in Congress is that you can use a quick shorthand to say I'd like to associate myself with the comments of other speakers, and I will do that here to keep my comments brief. And I do want to associate myself with the comments of my Democratic colleagues, in particular Mr. Pallone, Dr. Schreier, and Dr. Ruiz, as well as Representative Craig, and all of my colleagues made excellent points. And I think it's really important that we understand that there are a couple of things that have been said throughout this debate that I've listened and I've made notes, and I can't possibly respond to everything, but I think that there's a real problem here because a lot of this discussion is based on a false premise about what is happening. There have been a lot of discussions about surgery and decisions made by children. I think that our colleagues have made clear that these are decisions that are made for anyone under 18 with parents and with physicians. And I think what some of my colleagues have expressed is that it is unusual to hear our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And the reason it feels so out of sync is having them talking about replacing the judgment of parents and doctors, healthcare providers, with the judgment of the federal government, with the judgment of those of us sitting here that don't know any of the specifics of the situation, that don't know any of the particular facts in that matter. And it's the kind of thing that we're used to hearing them say they don't support. And so I think that that's why there's so much confusion here, because you're seeing this response to something that is, as we've heard from our colleagues, as we've heard, I'm not on the subcommittee, but in testimony about the incredible complexity and of these decisions. And I know from personal experience with constituents and friends, the incredibly challenging situation of parents trying to do the right thing for their kids. And we're talking about replacing their judgment with the judgment of the people sitting in this room who, as Ms. Craig pointed out, have said they don't know everything about it. So why are we trying to take this decision from physicians and parents who are trying to provide the best possible care with this incredibly blunt instrument that is incredibly punitive and is going to affect the training of future physicians? So I think that, the points that have been made, I won't reiterate all of them, but I do want to respond to one thing that my colleague, Mr. Crenshaw, mentioned. because I wrote it down. It really struck me, and I want to say it deeply offends me that he described what we're talking about now as a social contagion. This is not a contagion. These are our constituents. These are people who live in my district. These are people who live in our shared beloved home state of Texas who are thinking about moving because they don't think it's safe for their families and their children. These are our constituents, all of our constituents, and we should be approaching the conversation about their needs and their rights in a way that is constructive and not referring to our constituents as contagions.
Will the
it just-
gentlelady yield so I can explain that, and I'll give you all the data to support it?
I will finish my statement because I think what is important here is that we are here to protect the rights of our constituent and the freedoms of our constituents. That is exactly what we are talking about doing on this side of the aisle, and it's something I wish that everyone in here would support. We need to support the rights and freedoms of Americans, of all Americans, including transgender kids and their families. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair yields 5 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm going to yield to the gentleman from Texas, Representative Crenshaw.
Thank you to the gentleman. All right, let's talk about why I call this a social contagion, because it's recent and it's a trend, and we have all the data to support it. Look, I haven't insulted anybody today. I've been insulted many times, told that I'm offensive, that I'm cruel, that we have no compassion for children. I'm just reciting data. I'm just reciting data. Nobody has once addressed the fact that our data relies on 5 systematic reviews, which is the gold standard of any kind of evidence-based care. That's what we're relying on when we make this decision about whether this is good or bad. All right, but let's talk about why it's a social contagion. Look, just in the UK, referrals went up by a factor of 33 between 2009 and 2018. There was one pediatric gender clinic that did this kind of affirming care in 2007 in the US. Now there's over 70. The rate of diagnosis increased by 20% each year between 2017 and 2020, then shot up 70% between 2020 and 2021. These are real numbers, folks. Prescriptions for both puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones went up by at least 220% between 2017 and 2021. And that's probably an underestimate. This is a study by Reuters, and it's a significant undercount because they're only able to look at insurance claims. Surgeries, both double mastectomies and genital surgeries, have also increased significantly in recent years. Reuters documented 56 genital surgeries in patients between 13 to 17 between 2019 and 2021 alone. None of this was happening before. So what's the difference? And why is there other studies that show that you're far more likely to identify as transgender if your peers do so? To say that it's not socially based, to say that it's not based in what your peers are doing, would be refuting the evidence entirely. That's why I say that. It's not offensive, it's a fact. All of the data supports it, all of the numbers support it. So why do older generations not have these same numbers? Why? Could it be that because they didn't have access to all the social media and all of that peer pressure and this new trend? Why is it that, years ago we thought that frontal lobotomies were okay, or electroshock therapy was okay? All the scientific consensus thought that was okay too. Sometimes it's just wrong. In this case, the scientific consensus already says it's wrong. I want a Democrat colleague to please refute all of these systematic reviews. Tell me why they're wrong. I tell you why each one of your studies that you present is wrong, because I've looked at it before you did. I know them better than you do. So let's have that debate. Let's actually debate the science. Don't make this about emotion. Because you know what, that emotional hit, that'll happen to that kid when this happens to them when they're 12 and they transition and they're 25 or 30 or 35 and they can't have kids anymore. What's their emotional state gonna be then? How are we not thinking about that? And how are we the cruel ones for even bringing it up? I yield back to my colleague from Georgia.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yield to the gentleman from Virginia.
Would the gentleman from Texas yield for a question? That Texas. Mr. Crenshaw.
Yeah, okay.
So I was just wondering if you were aware that last week the AP reported that, and I quote, the National Health Service said Friday, talking about UK, National Health Service said Friday that outside of research setting, puberty suppressing hormones should not be routinely commissioned for children and adolescents.
I was aware. I'm aware that from Finland to Sweden, United Kingdom, Norway, Belgium, Switzerland, France, I mean, this consensus is growing. I'll read a quote here. Every systematic review of evidence to date, including one published in the Journal of the Endocrine Society, has found the evidence for mental health benefits of hormonal interventions for minors to be of low or very low certainty. By contrast, the risks are significant and include sterility, lifelong dependence on medication, and the anguish of regret. For this reason, more and more European countries and the international professional organizations now recommend psychotherapy rather than hormones and surgery as the first line of treatment for gender dysphoric youth. And a key difference is that in the United States, immediate affirmation models are being used. As the head of Boston Children's affirms for us, they're handing out puberty blockers like candy. And yes, I understand that parents have that are there. We never said they weren't. Right? Don't debate points we aren't making. Okay, but the parents are being informed by people who are being misinformed. Like the science is the science, the data is the data. I yield back.
I yield back.
Madam Chair, I yield back.